Joanne Steffi was convinced that her former neighbor, Oba Chandler, had murdered Joe Rogers and her daughters. She had been haunted by his resemblance to the police sketch and now believed she had matched his unique handwriting to a sample of the killers published in the newspaper. Joanne made a copy of her proof and faxed it to the investigators. She hoped detectives would soon be calling her to tell her she had finally solved the mystery. Joanne Steffi wasn't the only person to send in a handwriting sample. Sergeant Moore's gamble to publish the killer's scrawl had generated an overwhelming response.
We were flooded with tips at the time. When I say that, we might get 100 in a day, another 100 the next day.
Steffi's sample of Chandler's handwriting was buried in a stack of tips waiting to be investigated. She wondered why no one from the department had called to confirm her suspicions.
Now at this point, Mom's starting to get really frustrated and starts making phone calls.
Is it true that your team got a faxed-in tip that wasn't processed for a while?
The problem is when you got 300 leads stacked up here, and every one of them are from somebody who says, I found the handwriting. I only had about 6 street detectives to go run down these leads.
Sergeant Moore was under intense pressure. It had been 3 years since the murders, and he hadn't named a suspect.
It was a battle because there's limited funds, and there's a limited number of investigators trying to solve many cases, including many homicides.
The chief of police wanted the case shelved. Sergeant Moore knew he had only a few more weeks before the task force would be dismantled. Everything he believed in was on the line. What was it about this case that you just couldn't let go of?
I had to put myself in Hal Rogers' shoes. What was he feeling like? How could I let that go? If this was my wife and my daughter, I would search to the end of the earth to find out who did it.
You actually staked your career on this, didn't you? Tell me about that.
Well, I really didn't care about what was going to do to my career. We had to find this guy. And my career didn't matter. And I was going to do what it took to get it done.
Sergeant Moore knew he had nothing to lose. He commissioned billboards with huge photos of Joan, Michelle, and Christy asking, who killed the Rogers women? A few days later, a new billboard went up. This one even more eye-catching than the last. It featured the killer's handwriting in letters 6 feet tall.
I never would have believed that we would release evidence and put it on a billboard. I think we're the first agency that did that.
Joanne Steffi saw the new billboard on TV and picked up the phone one more time. This time, she was going to make sure Sergeant Moore himself saw her handwriting evidence.
So that civilian investigator that was working for me at the time, she calls me on the phone and says, this lady's really upset. She thinks she has it. So I said, well, okay, I'll take a look at it. So I looked at it and yeah, it looked good.
And in fact, the handwriting on the contract Joanne Steffi had submitted was a match to the writing on the brochure. Police also agreed that her former neighbor, Oba Chandler, looked just like the sketch of the killer. It was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. As the task force dug into Chandler's history, they found he matched the FBI profile.
We learned that he was a career criminal, for one thing, and had been involved in a lot of serious crimes, including kidnappings and robberies and sexual batteries. Started out very young. He wasn't a newbie to this world.
Investigators moved a step closer to an arrest. when palm prints in Oba Chandler's file matched the palm print on the brochure. They now had confirmed Oba Chandler had met the Rogers women and had given them directions to the Days Inn. Investigators tracked Chandler down on the other side of the state in Port Orange, Florida. Within days, he was under round-the-clock surveillance. But Sergeant Moore wasn't ready to confront him. He still needed more evidence.
We didn't have enough to charge him with anything at that point in time.
The brochure was proof Chandler had met the Rogers. Now they needed evidence. He had lured them onto his boat and murdered them.
No smoking gun, no crime scene, no DNA or fibers or hairs from the bodies because they've been in the water for 3 days.
Assistant State's Attorney Doug Crow knew he would never find physical evidence to link Chandler to the murders. But he wondered if the testimony of someone else Chandler had lured into his boat and attacked would be enough to convince a jury. He believed the similarities between the murders and the Madeira Beach rape case were his best chance.
So the first order of business was to go and personally interview the victim and see her face to face and see what type of witness she would be and how strong a witness she would be.
Doug Crow and Detective Katie Connor-Dubina flew to Canada to meet with Jane. They brought along a photo lineup to see if she could identify Oba Chandler.
I think that the whole reliving of the case after how many years had passed certainly was challenging for her. I didn't expect that she would pick him out after so many years.
But that's exactly what happened.
I remember vividly stopping at one and I pointed out the individual who raped me.
What was your reaction when you saw for the first time the picture of the man who had so savagely attacked you?
I wanted to throw up. It was just this feeling of horror just ran through my body, and the picture was face forward, and I had to ask that they turn it over.
Jane had identified Oba Chandler. As Crow listened to the details of her story, he became convinced it could be a central piece of his murder case. He believed Jane's testimony would show the technique Chandler used on her was the same method used to lure the Rogers women.
She was articulate, very intelligent, very attractive, very persuasive, and very straightforward. That was probably a seminal moment in realizing that we were going to be able to put together a case against him.
When he got back from meeting with Jane, Crow finally believed he could make a case against Chandler for the murders of Christy, Michelle, and Joan Rogers. But his first step was charging him with Jane's rape. When police arrested him, he seemed to be expecting it.
He was not surprised. He did ask, what for? And they said, rape. And he just, okay, and gets in the car. No, rape, what do you mean? I didn't do any rape, what are you talking about? You know, nothing. It was like, they got me.
At last, Oba Chandler was in custody, but the fight was far from over. Everyone involved in the case knew they needed more evidence before they could indict him for murder. Coming up, the stunning conclusion to Murder at Sunset.
What was your reaction when you heard that police finally had someone in custody?
I just hope they had the right one.